The CCTV footage that changed everything. Real police case. The night everything changed. It started as a typical Friday evening in the quiet town of Riverdale, a place that was rarely known for crime. The police station buzzed with a sense of calm as officers wrapped up their shifts, ready to head home for the weekend. But then, at 11:47 p.m., the call came in. A body had been found near the old railway station, a notorious spot that had seen its fair share of late-night accidents and strange occurrences. However, what made this call different was the condition of the body. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a natural death. The victim had been beaten and left to die in the shadows. Detective Sarah Jones, who had only recently transferred to Riverdale from the big city, was the first to arrive at the scene. The body was that of a man in his 30s, wearing a scruffy jacket and a baseball cap. His identity was unknown. As the officers cordoned off the area, Sarah noticed something that set off an alarm in her gut. The area was too clean. There was no blood trail leading from the body, no signs of struggle. Everything about this scene screamed professional execution, not a random attack. As the investigation team worked the scene, Sarah's mind raced. Who would want this man dead? And why in the middle of the night, in such a public yet secluded location? The first breakthrough came when the forensic team discovered something hidden beneath the victim's jacket. A small black flash drive. It was tucked into a side pocket, and there were no signs that it had been planted. A strange feeling crept over Sarah as she realized this was the key. Whatever this man had been involved in, it was big. Back at the police station, Sarah ordered a data recovery team to retrieve the contents of the flash drive. Hours later, the results came in. The drive contained multiple CCTV footage files, some time-stamped, others encrypted. The footage was from a variety of cameras around the town, grocery stores, ATM machines, parking lots. But one file stood out from the rest. The timestamp read 11:15 p.m., 30 minutes before the victim's body was found. When the video played, it was grainy and shaky, but clear enough. The camera focused on the victim, walking briskly through an alleyway near the railway station. But what caught Sarah off guard wasn't the man himself. It was the figure following him. A man, tall, dressed in dark clothing, appeared to be tailing the victim. The footage was too grainy to identify his face, but it was obvious that the two men were not strangers. The victim seemed to slow down and speak to the man, though the audio was muffled and indecipherable. But then, something even more disturbing happened. The figure reached into his pocket and pulled out a weapon. A knife. The victim stumbled backward, falling against a brick wall. The figure stepped forward, pressing the knife against his throat, then turned and disappeared into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Sarah froze. The footage was damning. This wasn't just a random attack. It was cold, calculated, and the victim knew his attacker. But who was the man in the video? She immediately ordered a full analysis of the CCTV footage. After hours of investigation, a breakthrough came from a security guard who recognized the figure. It was Jason Hall, a local bar owner with a history of shady business dealings and violent altercations. Jason had been known for running his bar with an iron fist, and there were rumors that he had connections to local gangs. But why would Jason Hall kill someone in such a public way, leaving a trail of evidence behind? The connection between him and the victim was still unclear. As Sarah sat in her office trying to connect the dots, she was interrupted by a call from the lab. The victim's identity had been confirmed. It was Ryan Burke, a local journalist who had been investigating organized crime in Riverdale for months. Recently published an exposé on illegal gambling rings, but was planning something bigger. Now, Sarah knew the truth. This wasn't just a random murder. Ryan Burke had been silenced. But by whom? And why had he been targeted just days before the release of his biggest story? But there was still one thing that didn't make sense. As Sarah reviewed the CCTV footage again, she noticed something chilling. The camera at the far end of the alleyway just before Ryan was attacked, had captured something unusual. In the background, a faint, blurry figure stood just out of frame, watching the entire confrontation. She felt a chill run down her spine. Who was the third figure? The third figure. If you think this story is intense, just wait. The next clue is more shocking than you could ever imagine. Don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and comment, because you won't want to miss how this case unravels. Detective Sarah Jones couldn't stop replaying the CCTV footage from that night. The third figure, whoever they were, had been standing just outside the alleyway, half hidden behind a dumpster. The more she looked at the grainy footage, the more questions piled up. Why had this figure not intervened when the victim was attacked? Why hadn't they done anything at all? Sarah leaned back in her chair and ran her fingers through her hair. The evidence was stacking up, but she felt like she was missing something important. The victim, Ryan Burke, had been a journalist, and from what she had learned, his last few weeks had been filled with tension. Burke had been chasing a lead on a much larger story involving organized crime. But who was this mysterious third figure? Was it a witness? Or someone else involved in the crime? The call came in the next morning. There was a match on the blurry figure. A lab technician had spent the night enhancing the footage, running facial recognition software across the available CCTV cameras in the area. The match was quick. The man in the background was Elliot Ross, a known associate of Jason Hall, the bar owner who had been captured on the footage attacking Ryan. Elliot was no stranger to the police. He had been arrested a few times in the past for minor offenses, mostly bar fights, public disturbances, and the occasional assault charge, but he had managed to avoid any serious consequences. The question was, what was he doing at the scene of Ryan's murder? Was he part of the attack, or was he simply an observer? Sarah couldn't ignore the connection to Jason Hall. The deeper she dug into Hall's background, the more she uncovered. Hall wasn't just a local bar owner. He had deep ties to local drug networks and had been linked to organized crime for years. Ryan Burke had been investigating Hall's business activities for weeks, and his latest exposé was supposed to reveal a massive money laundering operation that Hall was involved in. Could Ross have been there to warn Ryan off, or was something more sinister at play? Sarah called in her partner, Detective Lucas Reed, and they went over the timeline once again. They pulled up more footage from the surrounding area, looking for any clues that could link Ross to the scene. It was then that Sarah noticed something unusual. In the background of one of the parking lot security cameras, Elliot Ross was seen meeting with Jason Hall just hours before the murder. The two men had a brief but tense exchange. Hall appeared agitated, gesturing wildly, while Ross looked calm, almost too calm. The footage painted a picture of two men who had a lot to lose. Could it be that Jason Hall had been involved in Ryan's murder, or was Elliot Ross pulling the strings from behind the scenes? Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into a web of lies and deceit, with far more players than she initially realized. With this new lead, Sarah and Lucas went to Elliot Ross's apartment. They knew it would be risky. If he was connected to Hall, then they were dealing with a dangerous man who wouldn't hesitate to fight back. They knocked on the door, and after a brief moment, it opened. Ross was standing in the doorway, his face a mix of surprise and something deeper. Fear, perhaps. "Detective Jones," he said with a nervous laugh. "What brings you to my humble abode?" Sarah didn't waste any time. "We need to talk about Ryan Burke. We know you were at the scene the night he was killed." Ross's face drained of color. He stepped back from the door, but Sarah caught the movement of his hand. He was reaching for something. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her instincts kicking in. "Don't!" she ordered, but it was too late. Ross lunged for the door, trying to slam it shut. Sarah kicked it open with all her force, sending him stumbling backward. Inside the apartment, they found signs of a rushed exit. Papers were scattered across the floor, and a laptop was still open on the desk. On the screen was an email, A heavily encrypted message, but one that was clearly meant for someone in power. It mentioned the cleanup crew, a phrase that Sarah recognized as a reference to the group responsible for removing witnesses and cleaning up messes. This was no longer just about a single murder. The web was expanding, and it was far bigger than Sarah had anticipated. The question now wasn't just who had killed Ryan Burke, but who had ordered it, and who else was involved in the cover-up. As Sarah and Lucas looked at each other, they knew they were closer to the truth, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. The threat of exposure loomed large. And now, someone was willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. But just as they were about to leave the apartment, Sarah's phone rang. It was a message from the lab. "We've cracked the encryption." It was time to take the next step. But what they found inside that email would change everything once again. The hidden agenda. The message from the lab was simple but chilling. "We've cracked the encryption." Detective Sarah Jones couldn't breathe as she stared at the screen. The email's contents were finally revealed, and they weren't just a list of criminal activities. It was a hit list. It contained names of people who had been silenced by various criminal organizations, all tied to Jason Hall, the bar owner, and his far-reaching influence in the drug trade and money laundering operations. But there was something even more shocking hidden within the lines of code. One name stood out: Ryan Burke. But that wasn't the shocking part. It wasn't just the fact that Ryan's name was listed. It was the timestamp on the email. According to the data, the email had been sent days before Ryan's murder, from the same encrypted source tied to Elliot Ross and Jason Hall. Jason Hall ordered Ryan's murder? Sarah muttered under her breath. The realization hit like a freight train. They'd been investigating the murder as a random act of violence, but this was something far more organized, far more planned. Ryan's expose had become a direct threat to Jason's business empire, and in a town like Riverdale, no one was safe once they became a liability. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with an alert from the local police. Elliot Ross was missing. His apartment had been emptied out, and there was no trace of him. The lab reports confirmed it. Elliot was no longer in town. Had he run, or was he taken? "We need to move fast," Lucas Reed said, snapping Sarah out of her daze. "We can't let Hall slip away too. If Ross is gone, Hall is next." They immediately launched an operation to locate Hall, but something gnawed at Sarah's mind. How had this hit list, containing all the names of the players in the crime ring, ended up on Ryan's desk? Was it possible that Ryan knew too much? That he had figured out the true scale of the conspiracy? And that he'd gotten too close to the truth? Or had it been planted by Ross, trying to lead them in the wrong direction? They weren't the only ones who wanted answers. The quiet town of Riverdale was beginning to unravel. As Sarah reviewed the evidence, she couldn't shake the thought that they were chasing something bigger than they ever imagined. Ryan hadn't just been investigating local crime. He had stumbled upon something deeply connected to powerful people who had the means to cover up murder after murder without blinking an eye. The night was growing late when the next breakthrough arrived. Sarah sat in her office, glancing at the closed case files stacked on her desk, when an anonymous tip came in through the department's secure email server. The message was short. "Check the harbor. Tonight. Hall won't go down without a fight." They knew what they had to do. Without hesitation, Sarah and Lucas geared up and raced toward Riverdale's old harbor, the last place they could possibly find Hall. The place had been abandoned for years, the docks decaying under the weight of neglect. When they arrived, the first thing they noticed was the eerie silence. No ships, no boats. Nothing moved in the misty night air. But then Sarah spotted it. A large black van parked near the far end of the docks. The headlights were off, but there was no mistaking it. This was where the final confrontation would take place. They moved quickly but quietly toward the van, weapons drawn, every instinct telling them they were about to walk into a dangerous trap. As they reached the corner of the dock, they heard voices. Two men were arguing. One of them was Jason Hall. The other was Elliot Ross. They were standing near a pile of shipping crates, speaking in low voices. The conversation was muffled, but Sarah caught the words "cleanup" and "Endga," me. Words that were chilling given the circumstances. Sarah motioned to Lucas to move in, but before they could make a move, they heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot ring out into the Tiermalm. Colde.